G'day guys, Mac with the Circle, and today I want to look at the Demons of the Ruinstorm and try and explain some of my problems with the list. Now, specifically, we're going to look at stat lines on units, armor saves on units, the different weapon availabilities that these units might have, and we're going to go from there. So, first things first. These are the stat lines. The ones in red are red, well, this light orange colour actually, for a very specific reason. That is because they don't use the emanations. These units cannot use any of these weapon upgrades, which are ranged attacks. Instead, they have their own, and I'll discuss their individual strengths/weaknesses as I get to it. Now, as you can see, we have 3 different tiers of HQ, and in obviously descending order of strength. And this is a common theme you'll see throughout the list. There is a lot of relatively high strength, as in strength 8 and strength 7. A lot of high toughness. Toughness 7, toughness 6 is pretty high as far as heresy goes. Not many things make it past toughness 4 or 5, except for mechanic and monstrous creatures and primarchs. Wounds-wise, a lot of multi-wound units are here. Initiative-wise though, Marines or worse. And attacks-wise, Marines with combat weapons is roughly the general level. You get the occasional unit which has a few extra attacks, and leadership across the board on big guys is good, but can be lacking at times. 7 is a 50-50, you're going to make it. So that can be rough. And saves-wise, they're 4+, basically across the board. And that's not terrible, but it could be a lot better, let's face it. 4+ armor saves means that things like heavy bolters, which are everywhere in the heresy, autocannons also everywhere, those weapons are just going to end your units. Heavy flamers, even though you'll get a save against it, Volkite weapons are really going to devastate you because high strength versus your low toughness. Yeah, hordes of demons are going to be very easy to kill. Things like whirlwind blasts are actually pretty useful here. Any sort of ordnance weapon, quad mortar, that sort of thing will crump through a lot of the smaller guys in the force. Now, the only sort of thing I haven't displayed here is points values, because I don't want an overly litigious Games Workshop to come hounding after me for giving you the facts, because that's the sort of dumb things they do. Now, this box that's being highlighted on the screen right now, this here is where I can input any one of the demons from this list. So obviously any of the units that aren't in red, and whatever I put in there, it will modify all of these weapons to the stat lines they'll have in game, with the additional modifier of which Ruinstorm turn it is. So, let's go from there. What sort of ranged attacks are we talking about with this force? Well, generally, they're pretty pathetic. If I take Ruinstorm Lesser Demons, for example, and pop them into there, the best case, which is your turn 1, this is what you're looking at. The Rift Barb, the strongest anti-tank weapon in the army, Strength 7 Armor Bane. Against light armor, that's a pretty good weapon. You're going to kill rhinos, but you've got to get within 12 inches to pull it off. That is something difficult to do, and you are paying quite a few points for it. On the little guys, you're only looking at the not 2, not 4 category. On the big guys, though, you're looking at the not 14, not 16 category. I'm very good with my codes, aren't I? You can't tell what I mean. So, those weapon attacks there, it's reliable anti-armor in a way. You're gonna knock off hull points. But, here's the big kicker. Look at the AP values. That is the very best weapon in this force, the Rift Barb, at AP3. Why is AP3 special? You cannot blow up a vehicle with it. You cannot devastate super heavy vehicles and cause multiple hull points of damage with it. You are not upgrading your shots. That means every shot that gets through has a 50% chance of just being shaken or stunned. Those elusive, immobilized, and weapon destroyed results, good luck getting them. Okay, you're going to be causing a lot of shaken, a lot of stunned with these attacks, and knocking off hull points. Now, the average roll on 2d6 is a 7. So, if you roll a 7 against a flare shielded vehicle, like a Spartan, you're not going to hurt it, in general. But against Predators, you're going to be glancing, and against Rhinos and stuff like that, anything up to armor 12, you got pretty good odds of penning, provided they don't have cover, provided they don't have invulnerable saves. But the big thing letting you down here is range. You've got to get within 12 inches, and that hurts. It's also worth pointing out that the Corrosive Vomit and Flaming Ichor, these weapons suffer from one important flaw, and that flaw is that they can only be fired by 1 in every 3 models, and you have to pay full points for every model in the unit to take them. So, for example, if it's a 5-point upgrade, and you've got 10 models in the unit, you have to pay 50 points. But only, 4 of the models in the unit could fire this weapon. And again, this is a turn 1 best case scenario. What happens if it's turn 3 or 4? Well, that's easy. Our strength and toughness modifier goes to 0. Straight away, we're down to 6. The modifier here has now pretty much put guaranteed hull pointing of Predators off the table, because you're going to be lucky to roll that high. You're not going to be penning reliably here. You're going to be glancing at best. So, straight away, the strongest anti-tank weapon just got a lot weaker. Now, in the early game, it matters. It matters a lot. Turns 1, 2, and 3 are where the game really gets going, because turns 1 and 2 is things are maneuvering around, getting into positions, lots of pot shots are being taken, but it generally takes a couple of turns to cross the board. In the late turns, when you're trying to knock off the remaining dreadnoughts and the objective holding units, that's where it starts to become critical, because if we go to turn 7, it's a strength 4 shot. That's not great. If you look at this across the board, that's starting to get pretty woeful. So, even on your big boys, your Ruinstorm Greater Daemons, for example, if I plug the best boy we've got in there, he can still hit with a strength 8, you'd hope. But that's with buffs. That's with buffs. And it's a melter gun. That's all he's got, really. I don't know. That's pretty rough, I think, in the late game. And you're going to be struggling to have units in the late game. I do question myself on this constantly. Like, maybe I'm being a bit harsh on this list, but no, I'm pretty confident at this point. It's got problems. Ruinstorm Greater Demon Beasts. You can get 3 of these in a unit, whereas the Ruinstorm Demon Behemoths are single unit. Same with the Ruinstorm Demon Shrikes. Now, whilst both of these are sort of seemingly good units, and yeah, they're not going to get killed as easily as others, thanks to high toughnesses, a lot of wounds, Ruinstorm Demon Shrikes are probably the most capable of getting to the enemy. So if I take their stat line and plug that into this little calculator, this is what we get in turn 7. Now, my big problem with this is that not only do you have to buy this weapon, but this is using up one of your 2 upgrade slots for the unit. So, okay, I might have a unit like the Demon Shrike, which is still a pretty strong opponent in turn 7. If I go to turn 1, Pretend this thing jumps straight out of a warp rift into battle. And he's running around with a strength 10 assault 1 arm bane weapon. That's really strong. And he's got the wings. He's fast enough to potentially get close enough to a unit to pull off those alpha strikes against things like Land Raiders. Okay, cool, great. We're going to assume that the Land Raider doesn't have cover, or it's not hull down, something like that. What is this demon going to do now after it kills that vehicle? What are you arming this weapon, this demon with? If you take a psychic level, that's it. You're getting no buffs to your armor saves, you're getting no buffs to your attacks. That's a problematic thing. If you're going to take this demon and you're going to kit him out for assault, like I would, because I think that's its bread and butter, you want it to be an assault, then you're probably going to be taking something like the Flensing Talons, I believe they are, that give you shred on your attacks. So re-rolling to wound. I want to get a better armor save. I'm only toughness 6. Toughness 6 and only 5 wounds is not that great. Marines are going to hit you on 4s, they're going to wound you on 6s, but if you go up against something like, I don't know, Blood Angels, who are going to get bonuses on their to wound rolls, if you go up against, here's a really strong case, go up against Dark Angels with Calibanite Blades. Tyrannic Greatswords, not Calibanite Blades. Any wound that gets through will instantly kill you. So, you need a good armor save. You need that survivability. Or you've got to have a way of bodyguarding yourself. For the Ruinstorm Demon Lords, it's wings. If you run them on foot, okay, they can take a unit of Ruinstorm Demon Brutes as a bodyguard. That's good for ablative wounds, but Ruinstorm Demon Brutes are basically slightly tougher Ogrins with an invul save. They're not fast moving, and if you give them wings so they can move faster, move that magical 12 inches, well, the problem is that, again, you're giving up something, and Ruinstorm Demon Brutes are not a monstrous creature. They don't have the armor-ignoring attacks. You could give them something like the Crushing Claws, which will give them rending, but that's it. If you do that, rending and wings, that's all your upgrades possible for the unit gone. And when you're paying something like 70 points off the top of my head, to 80 points, something like that for that combination, that's rough. That's really rough. And toughness 6, 3 wounds, okay, you're not going to get instant kill by anything. But again, the late game, turns 5 and 6 and 7, strength 10 will kill you. And even strength 8 by the time you're in turn 7, they can instant kill you. And you don't have great armor saves. I mean, look at Mechanicum players. Castellax die, and Castellax are a lot tougher than most of the units in this list. They're toughness 6, they've got more wounds, they have better armor saves. And they're monstrous creatures, they have attacks which ignore armor in close combat, all as default, as well as decent ranged weaponry options. You don't have any of that with these demons. So, using this list effectively, I think, is going to be quite difficult. And probably a lot of this is due entirely to the points costs of a lot of these upgrades. If I take that Ruinstorm Lesser Demons example, that's their stat line in the game. Weapon skill 4, ballistic skill 4, they've got a strength toughness of 4, initiative 4, they're a marine. A scout marine, but they've got an extra wound and extra attack. This unit is your main scoring unit in the force. They're not tough, and they're the cost of a marine, but a marine comes in with a 3+ armor save and a bolt gun. So that marine has a ranged option. If you want to pay the points on these Ruinstorm Lesser Demons to give them something like Spine Volley, for example, you've now given them a bolt gun at rapid fire range. It's rough. And another thing you've got to remember as Ruinstorm is because you're emerging from the warp rifts, the problem here is that you aren't necessarily going to be able to stay near them all game. If you have objectives or something like that you've got to hunt after, you're going to have to walk away from the Ruinstorm, Warpstorm markers. That's going to make things harder for you because you're losing that reroll to your invulnerable saves, which gives you some survivability, the rerollable 5+, and you're going to have to be confronting other people on their own terms. And not only that, people can stack the odds against you. It's a 5-inch template equivalent, these Warpstorm icons that you place on the table. And here's where things get very important. What I've pulled up here is a circumference calculator. Everyone knows how to do it, 2πr, that sort of thing. What we're going to look at is we have a lovely 2.5 inch. Why have I picked that for our radius? That's a 5-inch template, which is one of the impassable terrain Ruinstorm icons. That's a total circumference of 39.89 centimeters. In millimeters, 398. Why am I bringing this up? Because a single tactical squad can be placed in a ring around this, and the gaps between their bases will not be big enough to allow an enemy to emerge from the portal. So, I don't like math. Alright, so a single 10-man tactical squad can actually surround one of these warp rifts and cut it off, meaning that no demons can emerge from it. And there's only 3 of these in play. This is very important because if a marine player is smart and uses his rhinos to drive up in turn 1, hop his unit out, or dreadclaws or drop pods, any of those options, move out from it and run, they could potentially run all the way around this object, spread their bases out a little bit, because remember, 32 mil bases, that's only 70 mils of gap that we need to make up between each base. So you're talking about a quarter of an inch over the whole unit gap between the bases. You'll create an impenetrable ring around these warp rifts, and the demon player will not be able to enter play with their units. Sounds dumb, doesn't it? It's because it is. Also, I've got Microsoft Paint open. Why do I have Microsoft Paint open? Well, we're going to play a little funny thing here. This here is our table. I'm going to paint it nice and red with a dark green background. Let's pretend this is our warp rift. I can't place this within 12 inches of another warp rift, within 6 inches of a board edge, or within 12 inches of an objective. So, what does the smart player do? Probably 90% of missions in the Horus Heresy are objective based. So I'm going to quickly mark out, and I'm going to use this bright red again. I'm just going to put down some little points on the table. Let's see. Firstly, within 6 inches of our board edge. Not perfectly to scale, but we know this area here is not going to have any warp rifts. I'll do it as a square or rectangle, that'll be a lot quicker. So, no warp rifts can be deployed within this area. Okay, cool. They can't be deployed within 12 inches of an enemy unit. So, you can almost discount a standard deployment zone. Probably a bit big for our deployment zone, but you can pretty much discount the standard deployment zone because there's always going to be units in some capacity in this area. What about objectives? A smart use of objectives. If they can't place their template, which is 5 inches, within a certain distance of the board edge, being 6 inches, well, all we've got to do is make sure that we place our objectives no more than that distance, the board edge, plus less than a template, which is 11, plus the 12 inches of an objective. So 11 plus 12 is 23. 23 inches. So if I place a token that's 5 inches, 4.5 inches, we'll say, actually. We place a token that's 4.5 inches out of our deployment zone and 23 inches in from the board. Just 2 objectives. Most missions have 5. I place these 2 objectives like so. In fact, I can place them even further out because they can't be placed within 24 inches of me. If I do this, what happens? Well, I can't place my Warp Rift, which I'll try and pick up nice and close to the circle to demonstrate. I can't place it anywhere within the red areas marked. So, what does this become? We get a big 12-inch area around each of our objectives. Something like that, anyway. If this area here, over on the left, between the edge and the circle, and I'm sorry if this is hard to describe, but I'm trying to draw it in a computer. If this area is 23 inches or less, we cannot fit our Warp Rift in here without being within 12 inches of an objective, within 6 inches of a table edge, or 12 inches of an enemy unit. That pretty much limits our Warp Rift to the top areas of the board. Now, does that make sense to people? My key numbers here are 23 inches from a table edge, 12 inches from our objectives. We've also got our enemy deployment zone, which you can pretty much guarantee there's going to be enemy units within, and you can't place your units within 12 inches of that. Potentially, if someone lines up their units along the full deployment zone, you can pretty much cut off the enemy from placing their Warp Rifts anywhere closer than halfway across the table, because that'll be 12 inches away from your deployment zone. And you could then deploy your objectives even further north, and essentially, if you could place your objective markers another 12 inches north of that, and you'd be getting into you're not deploying your Warp Rifts on the table at all territory. Does that seem smart or fair to anyone? And that's just with 2 objective markers. 2. If you have 3 given to you to place down, I mean, look, I'm not saying this is the way Heresy players would play it, but this is the rules as they've been written. And a arsehole, and there are plenty of them out there, let's be honest, it's wargaming, person playing for a win, tournament, something like that, they will abuse this. Infiltrating units, things like that can really create problems. If you're infiltrating units into the enemy deployment zone, it gets incredibly hard, because you can't have your Warp Rifts touching all these red areas. So, I know it was hard for me to explain, guys, but it's pretty fucking crazy. The Warp Rifts are incredibly important to the Demon player, because this is where their units enter play from. And as I said, if you can create a ring of units and place them around the outside of these, no units can exit the portal. And if you play your objectives and your units smart in deployment, then the enemy is not going to be able to place down their rifts anywhere useful to them. The reason I bring up the distance you can push the Warp Rift back is because that's the distance that units are entering play from to attack you. So if you can push them, in this case, 24, 25, even further, possibly into their own deployment zone away from you, then the fact that you have Rift Barbs with Armor Bane and Strength 7 and AP 3 and that sort of thing isn't going to mean shit, because that turn 1-2, good luck getting close enough to the enemy's tanks to use them. A smart Legion player is just going to hold their vehicles and their dreadnoughts back for a turn or so, wait for you to close the distance, wait for the strength on those weapons to drop down, and then they're going to countercharge you and they're going to tear your asshole open. That's why it's so rough. Now, conversely, Zone Mortalis, a smart player using his Warp Rifts, could potentially block whole corridors because they're a 5-inch template of impassable terrain. Well, placing a few of these strategically in the center of a Zone Mortalis could potentially just block it off. But other problems occur because how do you place the things in Zone Mortalis? Because you're going to need a wide open area, and that's very hard to do with a 5-inch template when most of the corridors are only 2 to 3 inches wide. So I don't know that anyone's thought that through either. Now, the whole point of this episode is not to shit on Forge World's design team. Not at all. I'm just pointing out there's a lot of things here I don't think have been considered by people that are not very wisely thought out. Now, what have the demons got going in their favour? I'd say the Ruinstorm Archdemon, especially in combat, is just an absolute monster. But stock with no upgrades, you're not seeing that thing below 3,000 points. Upgraded correctly, you're going to be looking at a unit that's 8 to 900 points, which means you're pretty much not going to see it below 4,000 points, because a Lord of War cannot take up more than 25% of your points in Horus Heresy. Because, limiting shit is not a bad thing. On the downside, Ruinstorm Possessed make no sense. They're supposed to be for tactical flexibility, but you have a unit which has no buffs. They're not demons. Even though they're called Possessed, they don't have the demon rule. They don't have a demon save. They get no buffs from your generals. You can't attach your HQ units to the unit. The Ruinstorm Possessed here essentially are a squad of Marines or a squad of Guardsmen equivalent with basic weapons. And yeah, okay, the Marines have 2 attacks each. That's not terrible. And you could give the squad multiple melter guns, but they're all on foot. And at best case, they're running. So how long would it take a unit with on foot, deployed 12 inches in, to cross into the enemy deployment zone? With a run of 6 in each turn, it is still going to take you until turn 3 to be in the enemy's deployment zone and starting to harass them. And that's if you get a 6-inch run. You're not going to. You're going to get a 3 or a 4-inch run, or if you're like me, you're going to roll a 1, and instead of running, you're going to go 1-ing. And that means you're probably looking at 3 to 4 turns to reliably get your units close enough to use those melter guns. And you better hope that nobody hits your unit with some sort of weapon like, I don't know, a heavy flamer, a whirlwind, anything like that in that time. And, you're paying a bit of points for this. Like, a best case scenario for Ruinstorm Possessed unit, the Type 1, the Guardsman one with 4 melter guns is something like 160 points with 4 melter guns. For the same sort of points, you can get a Legion tactical support squad with melter guns. And I think it's a fair comparison because they're both support units. That means both of these units can't be taken as compulsory troops choices. They're tertiary troops choices, or secondary, whatever you want to call it. But essentially, you've got to buy 2 of something else first, which will be either Lesser Demons or Demon Beasts. And again, you might not be able to rely on these guys to come in from reserves on turn 1, because it's a 3+ roll. About 2/3 of your units are going to be coming in from reserves turn 1. So, yeah, it's rough. It is rough if you're going to play Demons of the Ruinstorm. So, anyway, I know this is a lot of blah 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 blahing on my behalf, but I hope people picked up something out of this episode. Whether it's smart use of the terrain to your advantage, objectives, that sort of thing, especially if they're objectives which are whole fucking buildings, which is also a thing in Heresy. Sometimes whole buildings count as objectives. If you got a 12-inch by 12-inch square building and you can't place a template within 12 inches of it, that building is basically a 36-inch circle of no. Where those Ruinstorm templates aren't going to come near. Placed in the middle of the table, that basically cuts off the entire table because the enemy can't place within 6 inches of a board edge. So 6 plus 6 is 12, 12 plus 36 is 48, that's the entire width of a table. So a building in the center of a table with a 12-inch template, something like an Aquila landing pad, yeah, you cannot place your Ruinstorm Warp Rifts on the table. dumb as dog shit. So something needs to be thought up there. Anyway, I'm back with the Outer Circle. Thank you all for watching me. I don't want to say whinge or be salty about it. I'm just trying to bring awareness here. I'd love to see some people's thoughts and feedback on their solutions to the problem. Because my solution to that would be change the Ruinstorm rift markers to a 3-inch template and just make it that they can be placed no further than, I don't know, 6 inches from a piece of terrain. Because 12 inches is, from an objective. 12 inches is rough, and 12 inches from the enemy is rough. I get it, they don't want things like turn 1 charges, or the fact that you might have monstrous creatures emerging from this rift, and you've got to deal with them basically on their arrival, or else they're going to charge you. Yeah, that is rough. But right now, the way it's written, not great. Perhaps if the template was placed down, but each turn it scattered d6 inches in a random direction, that it could be a fun way of doing it. You just place it in the center of the table, or you place 3 rifts in the center of the table at the start of the game, and then they each move d6 inches each turn, and your reinforcements just come out wherever they may be randomly on the table that moves from there. Could be fun. The other thing is they shouldn't be impassable terrain, because that blocks off your units and the enemy's units. And like I said, if you ring Marines around one, it's impassable terrain. You can't deploy your units within it. They have to be deployed outside of it, so they emerge from it like coming from a vehicle, and if it's ringed by Marines, you're not coming out at all. Fuck you. The only thing that might come out of it is a flying monstrous creature, or something with wings. But if you don't have that unit in your army at that point in the game, tough titties. See you all next time.